As I sit here, reflecting on the past 2 decades, I can't help but marvel at the unlikely journey Kenzie and I have shared. 20 years of marriage, a lifetime of memories, and a bond that I once believed was unbreakable. We couldn't have been more different when we first met. I was the calm, stable type, content with a quiet evening at home or a weekend spent tinkering in the garage. Kenzie, on the other hand, was a wild child, a party animal who craved nonstop fun and adventure. She was always the life of the party, the one dragging me out of my comfort zone and into the thick of social gatherings. Despite our contrasting personalities, there was an undeniable attraction between us. They say opposites attract, and in our case it seemed to hold true. I was drawn to her vibrant energy, her infectious laughter, and her ability to make even the most mundane moments feel exciting. She brought color to my world, a splash of spontaneity that I never knew I needed. Our backgrounds couldn't have been more different either. I grew up in a small, tight-knit community where everyone knew each other's names and looked out for one another. Kenzie, however, came from a bustling city where anonymity was the norm and the pace of life was always on fast forward. Yet somehow we found common ground. We bonded over our shared love for adventure, our desire to experience new things, and our commitment to building a life together. In the early years of our marriage, we were inseparable, tackling challenges as a team and celebrating every milestone along the way. Looking back, I realized that our differences were what made us strong. We balanced each other out, each bringing unique perspectives and strengths to the table. I provided the stability and level-headedness, while Kenzie brought the spark and the zest for life. Together, we created a beautiful harmony. As our marriage progressed, I couldn't help but notice Kenzie's party animal nature becoming more pronounced. What started as occasional nights out with friends turned into frequent late-night escapades and weekend-long benders. I'd often find myself waiting up for her, my worry growing with each passing hour. Kenzie's tendency to overindulge in alcohol became a recurring theme. She'd stumble through the door, reeking of liquor and cigarette smoke, her speech slurred and her eyes glazed over. I tried to be understanding, knowing that her demanding corporate job was taking a toll on her mental well-being. The long hours, the constant pressure to meet deadlines, and the cutthroat nature of her industry all contributed to her stress levels. Kenzie was working on a high-stakes project. She'd come home late every night, barely acknowledging my presence before collapsing into bed. On the weekends, she'd either be glued to her laptop, furiously typing away, or she'd be out with her colleagues, unwinding in a way that made me uneasy. I tried to broach the subject with her, expressing my concerns about her excessive drinking and the toll it was taking on our relationship, but Kenzie would always brush it off, insisting that it was just her way of coping with the stress. She'd assure me that it was temporary, that once the project was over, things would go back to normal. But the project ended, and another one took its place. The cycle continued, and I found myself growing increasingly frustrated. I missed the Kenzie I fell in love with, the one who was present and engaged, the one who prioritized our time together. Now, it felt like I was competing with her job and her partying for her attention. I tried to be supportive, to be the rock she needed during those challenging times. I'd cook her favorite meals, run her bubble baths, and offer a listening ear whenever she needed to vent. But the tension between us was palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were drifting apart. The late nights became more frequent, and Kenzie's absences grew longer. I'd find myself sitting alone in our living room, the clock ticking past midnight, then 1 a.m., then 2 a.m. The worry gnawed at my insides as I tried to convince myself that she was just out with colleagues, unwinding after a long day at work. But the excuses started to pile up. I had to work late on a project, she'd say, stumbling through the door at 3 a.m. We had a team bonding event that ran longer than expected. The words felt hollow, and the uncertainty grew like a weed in my mind. I couldn't help but notice the changes in her behavior. She was more secretive with her phone, always keeping it face down or quickly locking the screen when I entered the room. She started taking calls in hushed tones, slipping out of the room to have conversations I wasn't privy to. The worst thoughts crept into my mind. Was she using drugs? Had the stress of her job pushed her to seek solace in something more dangerous than alcohol? I felt sick to my stomach at the mere thought of it. One night I woke up, I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted her as she walked through the door, the clock reading 4 a.m. Kenzie, we need to talk, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. I'm worried about you. The late nights, the secrecy. Are you using drugs? Her reaction caught me off guard. Instead of the denial or defensiveness I expected, she burst into tears. How could you even think that she sobbed, her mascara running down her cheeks? Do you have any idea how much stress I'm under at work? I'm barely keeping it together. And now you're accusing me of being a drug addict. The guilt washed over me. Had I jumped to conclusions? Was I being unfair? I tried to backpedal to apologize for my accusation. I'm sorry, Kenz. I'm just worried about you. You're never home anymore, and when you are, it feels like you're not really here. She wiped her tears away, her face hardening. I'm doing everything I can to keep this family afloat, to give us the life we deserve, and this is the thanks I get. Accusations and mistrust. I felt the distance between us grow even as we stood face to face in our living room. The silence hung heavy in the air, the unspoken words and unresolved issues threatening to suffocate us both. I sat at my computer feeling a mix of shame and frustration as I navigated to a pornographic website. It had been weeks since Kenzie and I had been intimate, and the lack of physical connection was taking its toll on me. I couldn't remember the last time we'd even shared a passionate kiss, let alone anything more. As I scrolled through the videos, one thumbnail caught my eye. The woman in the image bore a striking resemblance to Kenzie. My heart raced as I clicked on the video, praying that it was just a coincidence. But as the scene unfolded, my worst fears were confirmed. There, on the screen, was my wife. Her face was unmistakable, even through the heavy makeup and provocative clothing. And then I saw the small, crescent moon tattoo on her hip. The same tattoo I had traced with my fingers countless times in our most intimate moments. I felt like I was going to be sick. My mind reeled as I tried to process what I was seeing. How could Kenzie, the woman I had built a life with, be starring in adult films? Had our entire marriage been a lie? With shaking hands, I clicked on the channel that hosted the video. My stomach dropped as I saw dozens of similar videos, all featuring Kenzie in various stages of undress and compromising positions. The titles were explicit, leaving no doubt as to the nature of the content. Tears stung my eyes as I scrolled through the videos, each one a painful reminder of the betrayal I was witnessing. The woman I had loved, the mother of my children, had been living a double life, and I had been too blind to see it. Questions swirled in my mind. How long had this been going on? Was this the real reason behind her late nights and secretive behavior? Had she ever truly loved me? Or was our entire relationship a facade? I felt a wave of anger wash over me, mingling with the hurt and disbelief. How could she do this to me, to our family? What kind of person lies to their spouse day in and day out, while engaging in such a sordid profession? I closed the browser, unable to bear the sight of Kenzie's face on the screen any longer. My heart felt like it had been shattered into a million pieces. The trust I had placed in my wife now nothing more than a bitter memory. I sat in the darkness of our home office, the weight of Kenzie's betrayal crushing down on me. I didn't know what to do or where to turn. All I knew was that the woman I had loved, the life I had built, was nothing more than an illusion. And I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves as I heard Kenzie's car pull into the driveway. The sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood floor echoed through the house. Each step a reminder of the confrontation that was about to unfold. She walked into the living room, a smile on her face that quickly faded when she saw my expression. "Eric, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I stood up, my hands clenched at my sides. "We need to talk." "Kenzie?" She set her purse down, her brow furrowed. "Okay, what's going on?" I pulled out my phone, the screen displaying one of the many videos I had found. "Care to explain this?" Kenzie's face paled as she stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her eyes darting around the room. "Looking anywhere but at me," I scoffed, shaking my head. "Don't lie to me, Kenzie. I know everything." She took a step back, her hands held up in defense. Eric, it's not what you think. It's for work. A promotional project. It's not real. I felt my anger rising, my voice growing louder with each word. Stop lying to me. I saw the videos, Kenzie. I saw the titles. I saw you, my wife, doing things that no married woman should ever do. Kenzie's eyes filled with tears, her bottom lip quivering. Eric, please, let me explain. Explain what I shouted, throwing my hands up in the air. Explain how you've been lying to me, day after day, while you go off-end. And do this. Explain how you could betray me, betray our family like this. She collapsed onto the couch, her head in her hands. I'm sorry, Eric. I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to find out like this. I paced the room, my mind racing. How long, Kenzie, how long has this been going on? She sniffled, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. A few months. It started as a one-time thing, but then they offered me more money. And we needed the cash, Eric. We have bills to pay, kids to support. I shook my head in disbelief. So you thought the solution was to? To what? To become a porn star? To sell your body for money? Kenzie looked up at me, her eyes pleading. It wasn't like that, Eric. It was just a job. It didn't mean anything. I felt my heart breaking all over again. The pain of her betrayal crushing down on me. It meant something to me, Kenzie. It meant everything to me. You were supposed to be my wife, my partner. And now I don't even know who you are anymore. She reached out for me, her hand trembling. Eric, please, I love you. I never wanted to hurt you. Can't we talk about this? I pulled away from her touch, my eyes hard. Talk about what, Kenzie? How you've been lying to me for months. How you've been giving yourself to other men. While I sit at home like a fool, waiting for you. Kenzie sobbed, her shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, Eric. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I tried to keep my composure as I dialed Sheila's number, my fingers shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The phone rang once, twice before she picked up, her voice cheerful and oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Hey, Eric, what's up? I cleared my throat, trying to keep my voice steady. Sheila, I need to talk to you about Kenzie. It's important. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a hesitant, okay, what's going on? I took a deep breath, the words spilling out of me in a rush. I found out about her other job, the videos, the websites. I know everything. Sheila fell silent, and for a moment I wondered if she had hung up on me. But then she spoke, her voice soft and apologetic. Oh, Eric, I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. I felt my chest tighten, my grip on the phone turning my knuckles white. So you knew what she was doing. Sheila sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. Yeah, I knew. Bianca introduced her to the industry a few months ago. Kenzie, she was so excited about it, Eric. She kept talking about how much fun it was, how liberating it felt. I shook my head, trying to wrap my mind around the idea of my wife feeling liberated by selling her body on camera. But why, Sheila? We're not struggling for money. We have a good life, a comfortable home. Why would she do this? I don't know, Eric, I think. I think she just wanted something new, something exciting. You know how Kenzie is, always looking for the next thrill. I closed my eyes, the image of my wife's smiling face flashing before me. The woman I thought I knew. The woman I had promised to love and cherish for the rest of my life. How could she do this to me, to our family? Did you try to stop her, Sheila? Did you tell her how wrong this was? There was another pause, followed by a heavy sigh. I did, Eric. I told her that it was a bad idea, that it could ruin her life. But you know, Kenzie, once she sets her mind to something, there's no stopping her. I felt my anger rising again, the betrayal cutting deep into my soul. She should have thought about that before she decided to throw away our marriage for a few cheap thrills. Sheila's voice was gentle, almost pitying. I'm so sorry, Eric. I can't imagine how you must be feeling right now. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat making it difficult to speak. I feel like I don't even know her anymore, Sheila. The woman I married. The woman I loved. She's gone. I hung up the phone, my mind reeling from Sheila's revelations. The thought of Kenzie involving our son Lucas in her sordid activities sent a fresh wave of rage coursing through my veins. How could she even consider exposing our child to that kind of depravity? I paced the living room, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I needed to do something to make Kenzie see the error of her ways. But confronting her directly wouldn't work, not when she was so deep in denial. And then it hit me. I could write an article and expose of sorts, detailing Kenzie's double life. I could publish it anonymously, letting the world see the truth about the woman I once called my wife. Maybe then, faced with the cold, hard facts of her own actions, she would be forced to come clean. I sat down at my computer, my fingers flying across the keyboard as the words poured out of me. I knew that publishing the article would be a risk, that it could backfire in a million different ways. But I was willing to take that chance, to do whatever it took to save my family from the mess Kenzie had created. I hit publish, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched the article go live. For better or worse, the truth was out there now. All I could do was wait and see how Kenzie would react, and pray that somehow, some way we could find a way to heal from the damage she had done. As I leaned back in my chair, exhausted from the emotional toll of the past few hours, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message. I glanced down at the screen, my heart sinking as I saw Kenzie's name flash across the display. "We need to talk," the message read, and I knew that the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. I steeled myself as I heard the front door open, signaling Kenzie's return home. My heart raced, and my palms grew sweaty as I clutched the printed article in my hand. This was it, the moment of truth. Kenzie breezed into the living room, her face flushed and her eyes bright. "Hey, babe," she chirped, tossing her purse onto the couch. "What's up?" I held out the article, my hand shaking slightly. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low and serious. Kenzie's brow furrowed as she took the paper from me, her eyes scanning the headline. "What is this?" she asked, her tone defensive. "It's an article I wrote," I replied, my gaze locked on hers. "About you. About your activities." Kenzie's eyes widened, and she let out a forced laugh. "What are you talking about, Eric? This is ridiculous." I shook my head, a mirthless smile on my lips. "Is it? Because Lucas seems to think otherwise." Kenzie's face paled, and she staggered back a step. "What? What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the words I was about to say. "Lucas told me everything, Kenzie, about how you approached him, trying to get him involved in your business." Kenzie's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked like a fish out of water, gasping for air. "How could you, Kenzie?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How could you even think about involving our son in something like this?" Kenzie's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out a hand towards me. "Eric, please, I can explain." But I pulled away, shaking my head. "No, Kenzie, there's no explaining this. You've destroyed our family, our trust. I don't even know who you are anymore." Kenzie's shoulders slumped, and she buried her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice muffled. "I'm so sorry." I sighed, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. "Sorry isn't enough, Kenzie. Not this time." I stared at the divorce papers in my hand. The end. A bitter smile twisting my lips. I should have known Kenzie wouldn't go down without a fight. She was too stubborn, too self-centered to accept defeat gracefully. The legal battle dragged on for months, with Kenzie determined to bleed me dry. She hired a team of high-powered lawyers, no doubt paid for with the dirty money she'd earned from her sordid activities. They fought tooth and nail for every penny, every asset we'd accumulated over the years. But I had my own ace up my sleeve. The evidence I'd gathered against Kenzie was overwhelming, painting a damning picture of her double life. The videos, the recordings, the witness statements, it was all there, laid out in black and white. When Kenzie tried to sue me for defamation, I almost laughed in her face. How could she possibly think she had a leg to stand on? The truth was on my side, and the court saw right through her flimsy accusations. The judge dismissed her case with a wave of his hand, his eyes narrowed in disgust as he looked at Kenzie. She stood there, her face flushed with anger and humiliation, her fists clenched at her sides. I felt a sense of grim satisfaction as I watched her squirm. She'd brought this on herself, with her lies and her betrayal. She'd destroyed our family, our future, and now she was paying the price. But even as I reveled in my victory, I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life turning out. I thought Kenzie and I would grow old together, watch our children grow up and start families of their own. Instead, I was left picking up the pieces, trying to rebuild my life from the ashes of our shattered marriage. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was determined to come out stronger on the other side. As I walked out of the courthouse, the divorce papers clutched in my hand, I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. The world felt different now, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I was free from Kenzie's lies and manipulation, free to start anew. I couldn't believe the depths Kenzie was willing to sink to during our divorce proceedings. It was like I was seeing a whole new side of her, a vindictive, manipulative side that I'd never witnessed before. She tried everything in her power to discredit me, to paint me as the villain in our failed marriage. She even had the audacity to accuse me of being abusive, claiming that I'd threatened her and our children. It was a bald-faced lie, and I could only shake my head in disbelief as she spun her web of deceit. But Kenzie underestimated the power of the truth. She thought she could hide behind her lawyers and her lies, but the evidence I'd gathered was irrefutable. Lucas' testimony was particularly damning, as he recounted in vivid detail the numerous times he'd seen Kenzie with other men, the lavish gifts she'd received, and the extravagant lifestyle she'd led behind my back. As Lucas spoke, I watched Kenzie's face closely. She tried to maintain a facade of composure, but I could see the cracks beginning to form. Her jaw clenched, her eyes darted nervously around the courtroom, and a sheen of sweat glistened on her brow. The paper trail of Kenzie's illicit activities was equally condemning. Bank statements, credit card receipts, and hotel records all pointed to a life of excess and indulgence, funded by the money she'd earned through her sordid affairs. It was sickening to see the extent of her betrayal laid out in such stark terms. Throughout it all, I remained stoic and composed. I let the facts speak for themselves, never once stooping to Kenzie's level of petty mudslinging. I knew that the truth would prevail in the end, and I was content to let the legal system run its course. As Lucas took the stand, I felt a surge of pride and gratitude for my son. He'd grown into a fine young man with a strong sense of right and wrong. I knew it couldn't have been easy for him to testify against his own mother, but he did so with a quiet dignity that belied his years. My mother tried to involve me in her adult film business, Lucas said. Despite the weight of his words, she wanted me to help her recruit new talent to exploit other vulnerable young people the way she'd been exploited. I watched as Kenzie's face drained of color, her eyes wide with shock and fear. She hadn't expected this, hadn't anticipated that her own son would turn against her so completely. She told me it was easy money, Lucas continued, his gaze fixed on the judge. That I could make a fortune by preying on people's dreams and desires. But I knew it was wrong. I couldn't be a part of something so vile and destructive. As Lucas spoke, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. I'd tried so hard to shield him from the worst of Kenzie's behavior, to protect him from the ugly realities of her double life. But in the end, he'd seen through her lies and manipulations, just as I had. I stand with my father, Lucas said, turning to face me with a resolute expression. He's a good man, a man of integrity and honor. He doesn't deserve to be dragged through the mud by someone who cares more about money and fame than her own family. Kenzie's lawyer tried to cross-examine Lucas, to poke holes in his testimony and undermine his credibility. But my son held firm, refusing to be swayed or intimidated. He spoke the truth, plainly and simply, and in doing so, he shattered any remaining illusions about his mother's character. As Lucas stepped down from the witness stand, I caught his eye and gave him a nod of acknowledgement. For I knew how much his support meant to me, how much strength and courage it had taken for him to stand up to Kenzie. In that moment, I felt a renewed sense of hope for the future, a belief that I could weather this storm and come out stronger on the other side. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, Kenzie's behavior grew increasingly erratic and desperate. She seemed to be grasping at straws, willing to say or do anything to gain an advantage in the court battle. I watched in disbelief as she stood before the judge, her face contorted with rage and spite. "I deserve more than half of our assets," she snarled, her eyes flashing with malice. "I built this life, this family. He wouldn't have anything without me." Her lawyer tried to rein her in, but Kenzie was beyond reason. She ranted and raved, making wild accusations and baseless claims. She even went so far as to suggest that I had been the one who pushed her into the adult film industry, that I had somehow forced her to betray our marriage vows. I shook my head in disgust, unable to comprehend the depths of her delusion. How could she possibly believe that I would ever condone such a thing? That I would ever want my wife to degrade herself for money and fame? As Kenzie's tirade continued, the judge's patience began to wear thin. He banged his gavel, trying to restore order to the courtroom. But Kenzie was undeterred, her voice rising to a shrill pitch as she hurled insults and accusations at me from across the room. "You never supported me," she screamed, her face twisted with fury. "You never understood my dreams, my desires. You held me back, kept me trapped in this boring, mundane life. I had to find my own way, had to make my own path." "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice heavy with disapproval, "your behavior in this courtroom has been nothing short of appalling. You have shown a complete lack of respect for these proceedings and for your own family." Kenzie's face fell, her bravado crumbling under the weight of the judge's words. She seemed to shrink in on herself, her shoulders slumping as the reality of her situation began to sink in. I found myself actively avoiding any reminders of Kenzie's sordid past. The thought of seeing her face, her body engaged in those degrading acts, made my stomach churn. I couldn't bear to confront the visual evidence of her betrayal, to see the woman I once loved reduced to a mere object of lust and depravity. Even as the divorce proceedings wore on, I steadfastly refused to visit the adult video website where her videos were hosted. My lawyer had urged me to gather evidence to bolster our case against her, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The very idea of witnessing Kenzie's fall from grace, of seeing her prostitute herself for the cameras. I hadn't always been so averse to the world of adult entertainment. In our early years together, Kenzie and I had occasionally explored our sexuality through erotic films and magazines. It had been a playful, intimate part of our relationship, a way to spice things up in the bedroom. But this was different. This wasn't some harmless fantasy or role play. This was my wife, the mother of my children, selling her body and soul for the world to see. She had taken something sacred, something precious, and twisted it into a cheap, tawdry spectacle. I couldn't help but wonder how long she had been living this double life. How many lies she had told to conceal her secret career. The thought of her sneaking off to shoot scenes, of her engaging in all manner of depraved acts with strangers, made my blood boil with rage and disgust. And yet, even in my anger, I couldn't completely erase the memories of the woman I had once loved. The way she laughed, the way she smiled, the way she smiled, the way she looked at me with those bright, shining eyes. Those memories were tainted now, forever marred by the knowledge of her betrayal. As the divorce dragged on, I did my best to focus on the future, on building a new life for myself and my children. I threw myself into my work, into my role as a father, determined to provide stability and security in the wake of Kenzie's selfish actions. But even as I tried to move forward, I couldn't shake the gnawing concern for my son, Lucas. He was just a teenager, still trying to make sense of the world and his place in it. And now, he had to grapple with the fallout of his mother's betrayal, with the public humiliation and the private pain that came with it. I watched him closely in the weeks and months that followed, looking for signs of distress or anger. He was quieter than usual, more withdrawn, spending long hours locked away in his room. I tried to reach out to him, to offer my support and understanding, but he pushed me away, retreating further into himself. I knew he needed time to process his emotions, to come to terms with the fact that the woman he had once idolized had fallen so far from grace. But I also knew that he couldn't do it alone. He needed guidance, support, a listening ear and a steady hand to help him navigate the choppy waters of adolescence and family trauma. So I did my best to be there for him, to create a safe and stable environment where he could heal and grow. I encouraged him to talk to a therapist to find healthy outlets for his anger and confusion. I made sure he knew that I loved him unconditionally, that nothing could ever change that. As for Kenzie, I made a vow to myself that I would never see or hear from her again. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the consequences. I had no desire to maintain any kind of relationship with her, not even for the sake of our children. I knew that the scars of this experience would never fully heal, that the pain and betrayal would always be a part of me. But I was determined to build a new life for myself, one based on honesty, integrity, and self-respect. I would never again allow myself to be fooled by a pretty face or a charming smile. I would never again put my trust in someone who could so easily betray it. I would never again let my guard down, let myself be vulnerable to the kind of heartbreak that Kenzie had inflicted upon me. Instead, I would focus on being the best father I could be, on providing for my family and creating a stable, loving home. I would surround myself with people who shared my values, who could be trusted to have my back through thick and thin. And maybe, just maybe, I would find a way to love again, to open my heart to someone who truly deserved it. But for now, my priority was healing, both for myself and for my son. Everything else could wait.